Good is the enemy of great. And I've always been curious to try to understand what systematically separates the great from the good, the exceptional from the average. In our previous work, Good to Great, we looked at companies that had made a leap from average performance to exceptional, in contrast to others that were in the same or similar circumstances that did not make that leap, and we asked why. And that taught us a very important lesson. See, if some make a leap to great performance and others don't, but they're in the same circumstance, the answer cannot be circumstance entirely. And probably the biggest point from that work is that greatness is not entirely or even largely a matter of circumstance. Greatness, it turns out, is largely a matter of conscious choice and discipline. Later, we translated those ideas into Good to Great for the social sectors, coming to see that even though I'd spent most of my life studying business corporations, coming to see that if we only have great business corporations, and I believe it is important that we do, but if that's all we have, we will merely have a prosperous society. We will merely have prosperous nations. They would not be great. To be truly great, we must have great social enterprises. We must have great schools. We must have great homeless centers. We must have great hospitals. We must have great cause-driven nonprofits. And we must have great church leadership spread throughout every single little corner of the globe. But then we took a turn to the dark side. Instead of looking mainly at how enterprises become great, we wanted to see how great enterprises stumble, how the mighty fall. I became fascinated with this question, a little bit like kind of drawn into studying train wrecks. Because I'd watched some of the greatest enterprises in all of history, some of the greatest enterprises, some of which we'd even studied, fall from great to good, to mediocre, to bad, to irrelevant, to gone. And I realized that if it can happen to them, it can happen to anyone. No company, no church, no nation, no society, no individual person is immune. Anyone can fall. And many do. But not all. As we examined this question, we found that the mighty fall through a series of stages, at least through the lens of our analysis. And I want to lead into this with a personal story to highlight the idea. In August of 2002, my wife, Joanne, now we're celebrating our 30th wedding anniversary this year, which I consider a good start. Pretty good considering we got engaged 4 days after our first date. I unabashedly have an incredible deep love affair with Joanne. We went running up to a thing called Electric Pass outside of Aspen. It starts at about 9,600 feet and it runs to 13,800 feet. And Joanne, a former Ironman champion, and I, running together is not exactly the right term. We run, she waits. And we went running up there, and I emerged from tree line and kind of capitulated to walking. And I noticed her far ahead of me, way above the trees, on these switchbacks, running towards the summit of Electric Pass in this bright red sweatshirt. 2 months later, we received the diagnosis that would lead to 2 mastectomies. We're well past that now. It's 8 years and her health is good. I think we're beyond real worry. But the image stuck in my mind because if you think about it, here she is, the absolute picture of health, the absolute picture of strength, in that bright red sweatshirt, running, pounding up the trails to Electric Pass, and she is already sick on the inside. And I began to wonder, maybe societal decline, maybe organizational decline is also somewhat like that, that you can be sick on the inside, but still look strong on the outside. Maybe it is something where it is hard to detect early, but a lot easier to cure. And easy to detect late, but a lot harder to cure. And so therefore we better understand something about the staging process. And so we took a look. And we began looking at enterprises that had fallen in contrast to others in the same circumstances that did not fall. And we found 5 stages of decline. And in your notebooks, we've reproduced these 5 stages for you. And these 5 stages will form sort of the framework of our conversation. I'm going to talk about the antithesis of each stage. So this isn't going to be just a great journey into depression and the dark side. We're going to talk about stage 1 and then what's the opposite of stage 1. But those 5 stages, briefly, are a hubris born of success leading to an undisciplined pursuit of more, which then leads to denial of risk and peril, which then leads to falling, which then leads to grasping for salvation, which then leads to capitulation. Now, if you'll notice something interesting in that diagram, you do not visibly fall until stage 4. This means indeed that you are going all the way through the first 3 stages of decline while you are still looking healthy and strong on the outside. This should terrify you. Now, one very important point. The disease analogy is helpful, but it's wrong in one crucial way. It turns out that these stages are largely self-inflicted. Unlike a disease, organizational decline is more what you do to yourselves than on what happens to you. Stage 1, hubris born of success. It is not success that leads to failure. It is what the great classics professor J. Rufus Fears describes as hubris, which is, in his words, outrageous arrogance that inflicts suffering on the innocent. Isn't that just a wonderful description? Outrageous arrogance to neglect our primary flywheel, to neglect our life calling, and to fail to renew that with as much passion every day as when we first began. Outrageous arrogance to believe that our success, if we are fortunate to have it, has not derived, at least in part, from luck or blessings that are entirely not of our own doing. Outrageous arrogance to believe that just because our intentions are good and our purpose noble, that therefore our decisions must be necessarily good. Bad decisions taken with good intentions are still bad decisions. The antithesis to hubris begins with really the overall capstone frame for everything that the summit is about, which is about leadership, but it is about a special type of leadership that we found in our previous work. And I want to spend a good chunk of our time here because it never hurts to go back to one of the most important findings. Let me share with you briefly 3 on the surface very different leaders. All business leaders, but they will serve our purpose for understanding. Number 1 is a remarkable man named Darwin Smith, who took Kimberly-Clark from good to great. And Darwin Smith, this was a man who had had a charisma bypass. He was a self-described, eccentric, kind of nerdy-looking, had these sort of funky-looking black-rimmed glasses, and this was a guy who didn't sort of hobnob and do elephant bumping. His idea of a place to go think was to get in a backhoe in his farm up in Wisconsin and just move rocks from one end of the property, load them all up, then move them back to the other side of the property. This guy was strange, a socially adept, maybe not even adept introvert. And he said after becoming one of the greatest CEOs of all time, after making one of the gutsiest decisions any chief executive ever made, which was to sell the mills, 100 years of the corporate history, throw it into a new flywheel, building the consumer business, I was just trying to become qualified for the job. Leader number 2, Anne Mulcahy, who saved Xerox from the brink of complete catastrophe, that was facing Chapter 11, facing complete meltdown, who did not expect to be CEO. She is a very different, she was magnetic. I've seen her in Radio City Music Hall with 5,000 people absolutely riveted, goosebumps, wild, enthusiastic cheering, weeping, stomping in